First of a series of community forums to discuss the progress and solicit comments on the project to construct a new Coakley Middle School. I'm Alan Slater of the Norwood Finance Commission, and I'm also chairman of the Middle School Building Committee. We have over 140 people registered for tonight's meeting, so we're certainly pleased with the turnout. It shows the level of interest people have on the project, and it's also being televised live by NCM. Now, we have a lot to discuss tonight, but first, just a little bit of background. We'll get into more detail during the presentation. Now, following the completion of the new Norwood High School, the town voted to proceed with the long-term feasibility study on the remaining schools in the system. That study was completed in 2017. The clear recommendation was to proceed with the new middle school as the most pressing need in the entire system, not the older elementary schools, which was a surprise to us. Now, in early 2020, MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, accepted us into their program. That's a significant milestone in and on itself because MSBA typically accepts maybe only 1 in 10 communities that apply in any given year. So this is really a great opportunity for Norwood to receive state funding. Now, just to note, there's going to be several Q&A sessions during the presentation, and we'll explain the procedure to you to ask questions. It's really very, very simple. So I'd like now to introduce the members of our team, starting with our Middle School Building Committee. Again, I'm the chairman, and alphabetically, we also have Kathy Carney, who's the contract administrator for the town, Dave Catania from the school committee, Diane Ferreira, who is the principal of the Balch, Dr. Margot Frazek, who is principal of the Coakley, Matt Lane and Tom Maloney, both from the Board of Selectmen, Tony Mizuko, our town manager, general manager, Paul Riccardi, the townwide director of buildings and grounds, our facilities manager, Teresa Stewart, chairman of the school committee, Dr. David Thompson, superintendent of the Norwood School Department, and Matt Walsh, who is the building commissioner for the town of Norwood. And thank you to everybody for working with us. And again, thank you. I just also like to introduce the members of Compass Project Management, who are our OPM. And as you recall, they were also our OPM for the Norwood High School, as well as for the new electric light building and the DPW. We have Tim Bonfatti, Brian Jarvis, and we have Chin Lin. And lastly, our architect, AI3. Again, you also recall AI3 from the great work they did on the Norwood High School project. And the principal in charge of the project is Jim Jordan, and he will introduce the other members of his team during their presentation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim for the presentation.
Great, thank you, Chairman Slater.
Thank you.
Alan, my name is Jim Jordan. I'm a partner at AI3 Architects, and just as Alan said, it's been a little over 14 years since we began the design process for the Norwood High School project, and it's been just about 4 years since we began the feasibility study and long-range plan for Norwood. Obviously, we're very excited to be back in the Norwood community to discuss this first project in your master plan, the Coakley Middle School. Before we begin, let me introduce the design team members here with me tonight. First, we have project manager and senior associate Justin Tebow. And we also have our associate Julia Rahili, who worked closely with the Norwood community in developing the master plan and feasibility study. Chris Kendall is with us tonight. She's the project architect for the Coakley project. And finally, our educational planner, Kelia Kentor. You'll hear from all my team members a little bit later in the presentation. They each have separate roles that they'll be presenting for you tonight. So with that, let's jump right into the agenda so I can give you an idea of what's in store for the presentation tonight. Before we do that, just a few comments before we begin. Obviously, Norwood Media will be recording the community forum this evening. This meeting is obviously live, and the best way you can engage with questions is to use the Zoom Q&A chat feature. If you have questions after the meeting tonight, please send them to cmsproject@norwoodma.gov, or through the project website, www.newcmsproject.org. Make sure you click on the Contact Us tab at the top of the web page. Just for your information, we will not be checking the project website or email page during this presentation, so please use the chat feature for your questions. For the format of the meeting tonight, we will divide it into 3 major sections, followed with a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session after each section. In the first section, I'm going to focus on the MSBA process, and then Julie will review the feasibility study and long-range plan. The second session, Justin will focus on the project schedule, additional sites we recently investigated with our consultants, and finally, design options that we'll be studying further in the feasibility study phase. The third section of the presentation will begin with Kelia discussing the educational planning activities we recently engaged district leadership and teachers and staff with. And then finally, Chris will discuss community engagement, followed up with the grade level configuration presentation and live polling. And then we'll end the forum tonight with open Q&A. So let's jump right in and talk about the MSBA process. I wanted to highlight the partnership you have established with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. This partnership is much different than the model school program that we collaborated with you on for the Norwood High School. As Alan mentioned, in 2017, the Norwood community, the school committee, and the long range planning committee engaged in the master plan process. As the architects for that process, we assembled a team of just over 50 professionals, which included specialists such as civil engineers, code consultants, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural engineers. And we did a thorough analysis of the Willett Early Childhood Center, all 5 of your elementary schools, and the Coakley Middle School, and of course, the Savage Center. As Alan mentioned, the outcome of this study shows the Coakley Middle School had the highest need based on 3 levels of evaluation. The first of which was educational performance, which means the shortcomings of the facility that hinder the delivery of the educational program. The second was the building performance, which are really the conditions or the infrastructure, such as the MEP systems and exterior wall systems. And finally, the third topic was functional performance, which is the space constraints and overcrowding that's experiencing at the elementary school level and the middle school level. So Julie will go in a little more detail on these topics in a moment. But the next portion of the MSBA process was the completion of the master plan. This actually provided you the documentation that the school committee needed to submit the statement of interest, or what we refer to as the SOI, for the Coakley Middle School project. This was the first step of engagement with the MSBA School Building Core program. Your statement of interest, as Alan mentioned, was submitted in March of 2018, and the MSBA reviews these applications every year. And if you're not selected, you have to redo your application every year to stay in their queue. They only select the projects with the most need. If you just look at 2018, when you submitted your SOI, there was a total of 70 of them that were submitted for the MSBA for consideration. They only picked 12 out of those 70, and Coakley Middle School was one of those. So you're very fortunate to be in their program on your first try. In December of 2018, the MSBA board invited Norwood into the eligibility phase. Now, this phase included a few tasks the district had to complete, such as forming the building committee, reviewing maintenance practices for all your school buildings. You had to look at design enrollment certifications, and obviously community authorization and funding. So in August and November of 2020, the project team was formed with the selection of Compass as the OPM, and of course us as AI3 architects. So currently the project is in the feasibility study phase, which Justin will review in a few moments. The next phase after feasibility study will be schematic design, which will begin later this year. And then in the spring of 2022, the town will be asked to fund the project. So at this time, I'm going to ask Julie to take the presentation and give a brief recap on the investigation and findings of the feasibility study and long-range master plan that we completed in 2017.
Great, thanks, Jim. So in 2016, the town of Norwood released a request for proposals of a feasibility and long-range study that would assess the existing conditions of its public schools. For a town like Norwood to maintain and operate 8 public schools is hard work, and a feasibility study would shed light on which facilities are supporting this model or hurting it. Without familiarity of the schools, initially, as architects, we evaluate based on criteria. We look at demographic and population trends to understand if there'll be overcrowding in the future, or conversely, if a building will be underutilized in the future. We evaluate the physical characteristics of each building, structural integrity, systems, roof, interior, civil and site conditions, usually with the help of our engineers. And we review the overall program layout to evaluate if the building itself is supporting the type of education the district wants to deliver. A committee was established to select the design firm for the study, conduct progress meetings, periodically review the development, and ultimately make a recommendation to the school committee. We, AI3 architects, were selected and developed an almost 400-page document that we know today as the Feasibility and Long-Range Study for the town of Norwood. The study will be available at the project's website soon, and we'll share that address throughout this presentation. So I'm not going to recap all 400 pages tonight, but I will briefly describe our process and findings. During the evaluation period, AI3 and our design team of professionals toured all 8 buildings, myself included. I walked to the sites, evaluated the exterior and interior of each school, took tons of photographs, and met with the administrative staff at each school to get a firsthand account of what's working from the staff's perspective and what isn't. We very much understand that Norwood is a district of neighborhood schools shown on the map, each with their own identity. Again, 8 buildings are a lot to maintain, so much of the study chronicles past capital improvements plus an evaluation of the costs to continue these repairs over time on a cost per square foot basis. We'd like to point out that although operating with older systems and finishes, the buildings themselves are extremely clean, which reflects the superb facility staff in Norwood. In addition to cost per square foot, we looked at students per square foot, which allowed us to gauge which schools are overcrowded or showed evidence of overcrowding in the future, using NESDEC population projections. Cleveland Elementary, the Willett Early Childhood Center, and Coakley Middle School all scored below the comfortable average square feet per student ratio. Looking at the elementary schools specifically, not only are the overall buildings undersized for their populations, but specific learning spaces are also undersized per MSBA standards. The blue represents spaces where the square footage is less than the MSBA guidelines. During my walkthrough, though, insufficient space was obvious enough without these plan diagrams. The Willett was using the gymnasium as a combination gym library, while at Cleveland, the library and other storage consume the corridors. It should be noted that the data provided is based on these 2016 numbers, and we understand that measures may have since been taken. Looking at the Coakley, the required capital repairs far exceed those of any other building in the district. Undertaking these replacements would not provide a return on investment at this time. The roof is one example of a necessary capital repair. However, knowing the MSBA's involvement with the town, it wouldn't be worthwhile to make such a replacement now. In addition, the existing modular classrooms added to reduce overcrowding surpass the life expectancy of temporary classrooms. To make matters worse, the NESDEC projections report that the issue of overcrowding will become more severe over the next decade, whether it remains a 6 to 8 grade configuration or changes to a 5 through 8. So the town would have to be prepared to deploy even more modular classrooms if the building area didn't increase at all. And as if the building quality and physical size weren't problems enough at Coakley, the current building does not support the educational environment envisioned by the district. There's no sense of school community, indoor-outdoor connections, integration of project-based learning, and an overall lack of collaboration space. The images shown depict some of the 21st century learning spaces available in newer middle school buildings. Now, the following slides provide examples of how uninspiring Coakley currently is as an outdated learning environment. A collection of examples like this was presented to the school committee following completion of the study, so I'll only share a couple. Here we see dark interior corridors with no flexible learning space or transparency into other program spaces. And from this vantage point, it appears there's no end to the maze of lockers that wrap the academic core, just a solid wall disconnecting the program spaces from the circulation space. Ultimately, when building performance, functional performance, and educational performance were analyzed, Coakley Middle School underperformed in all three categories. So now, knowing all of this information, what did the study conclude? We developed 16 options that evaluated the number of buildings versus the cost to maintain over time, and reviewed our findings with the Long Range Study Committee. The committee provided feedback on which were viable in terms of maintenance efficiency, resolving overcrowding, and maintaining neighborhood identities. In reviewing these options, one factor was noticeably present in all 16. Coakley Middle School was a priority, and no matter the selection, it needed to be addressed. Following the conclusion of the feasibility and long-range study, the district felt confident submitting an MSBA statement of interest identifying Coakley Middle School as a candidate for entry into the grant program. The statement of interest lists the aging building systems, existing overcrowding, and lack of appropriate 21st century learning environments, along with many other examples as top priorities. In December of 2018, the MSBA accepted the statement of interest and invited the town of Norwood into eligibility. For copies of the statement of interest or the full long-range study, you can visit the project's website shown on the slide. It should be up there soon if it isn't already. And we understand that that's a lot of info, so I'm going to turn it back to Compass for questions.
So far, we have no. We don't have any question in the chat space, but I can update you, people that the statement of interest and as well as the study that Julie had mentioned have been uploaded onto the. It is uploaded onto the website. So it is a large file, so I broke it down into 3 different parts. So they're available for your review whenever you get to the website. Julie, we do not have any question that's posted in the chat.
Good job.
So,
a great job.
Why don't we, since we have other opportunities for people to ask questions, let's move forward.
Yeah, and if you think of something as we're moving through it, you can put a question in Q&A and chat, and we'll try to address it at the next question and answer session.
Right.
Okay, so the next portion of the presentation will focus on the current project phase and go through the targeted town meeting vote in spring of 2022. For this project to be presented at town meeting, the MSBA requires 2 board approval votes highlighted in red on the slide. To stay on track to hit these board votes, the project needs to submit the preliminary design program, or PDP, at the end of March. The preferred schematic report, or PSR, is due July 7th. This timeline would qualify the project to be presented at the August board meeting. The schematic design will continue through the fall and be submitted roughly 1 year from now in January of 2022. These dates keep the project on track to ultimately be discussed at the spring of 2022 town meeting. So how do we get to our first major milestone submission in July? This graphic illustrates how the first 2 phases, the PDP and the PSR, are distributed into major items that make up the report. Site analysis selection, which was completed this past Monday at the school building committee meeting. Existing condition survey and verifications will be wrapped up within the next month and is the second item. We're beginning to develop and evaluate the building options for a vote in May, which I'll discuss in more detail on an upcoming slide. The dashed vertical lines represent the 2 MSBA submission deadlines and the August board vote. This graphic also shows that this is not the only community forum we anticipate on having. This is the first of many. We want to hear from you, your thoughts, concerns, excitements, and questions. We have targeted a community forum every couple of months to keep everyone informed on the process and the project. The first item I noted was analyzing and determining where the project will be sited. The project team evaluated 10 sites throughout the town, including the existing Coakley site, Hennessy Field, Forbes Hill, the Savage Education Center, all 5 elementary schools, and the Winsmith Mills property. To determine which of these sites were best suited for the project, a ranking matrix was set up with 1 prerequisite and 28 site criteria questions. The site criteria included all aspects of siting a project, including general items like where is it in town and who owns it. Technical aspects include zoning, topography, soils, and wetlands. A large portion of the questions included are specific to a school project. Education is no longer restricted to within the walls of a building, but has become truly a fluid experience from within the classroom to the outdoors. The site can also support social and physical activities which assist in the development of a child. These are some specific examples of the ranking criteria illustrating the variety of scope. A preferred site would receive a yes or a check mark next to each criteria met. This is what the completed site matrix looks like. I don't expect you to be able to read all of the small text, but the large takeaway is that the sites were thoroughly vetted for multiple aspects. Across the bottom of the slide are the sites with their scores. As you can see, the existing Coakley received a 97% or was able to answer yes to 97% of the questions. Both Hennessy Field and Forbes Hill received a 59%, while the Savage Center received a 72%. The elementary schools, along with Winsmith Mills property, did not meet the initial prerequisite, therefore was not ranked. The prerequisite was whether the site physically had enough buildable area to fit a middle school with all of the supporting elements required. These sites are just too small, so the team ruled them out and focused their efforts on the first 4 sites mentioned. The matrix supports the project site being the existing Coakley site. At this past Monday night's building committee meeting, the existing Coakley site was unanimously voted as the preferred site for the project. The next required item of the project phase is to report on the conditions of the existing building. As Julie previously mentioned, an extensive study was completed for the master plan back in 2016-2017. The design team revisited the elementary schools and the middle school in December of 2020 to confirm conditions for the report. During this phase of the project, the team is required to submit a minimum of 3 design options. The 3 options are a code upgrade and base repair, which is just that, updating the existing building to meet current building and accessibility codes and repair the existing systems. This option does not consist of any new construction or renovations. The second option is a renovation addition option, which includes code upgrades, minimal reconfiguration of the existing building, and in addition to add square footage to the project. New construction is a third option and would provide an appropriately sized building that supports 21st century learning. Because of the overcrowding in the elementary schools identified in the master plan, the MSBA has supported the district's decision to explore 2 grade level configurations, a 5 through 8 and a 6 through 8 option. With the grade level configuration unknown at this time, the design team will carry both configurations forward. This means that in the PDP report, 5 options will be presented: a code upgrade, a renovation addition for 5 through 8, a renovation addition for 6 through 8, new construction for 5 through 8, and a new construction for 6 through 8. Note that at this phase, these are diagrammatic. Building layout and location on the site will be explored later in the process. We'll take a short amount of time again to open it up for questions if there are any. Just a reminder, if we don't get questions here, if you don't get them in, you can always submit them on the website. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chin to see if there's any new questions.
Yeah, we do have 3 questions. The first one is there an architect involved already? We do have AI3 Architects as the designer. That is, we went through a selection process with the MSBA, and so that's already settled. Second question is how much scrutiny does or will the MSBA complete regarding the town selected site? I think that maybe you guys will be the best person to answer that. MSBA's review of the site selection.
Yep. Yeah. So I can take a take a crack at that. So what I just described for the site selection is obviously a very abridged version of it. There were multiple professionals involved, engineers of all disciplines. And what we ultimately wanted to do was to look at any potential site within the town, and as identified the 10 sites, and truly see if, for one, a modern middle school would physically fit, but also if it truly supported it. There were 28 specific criteria, which ranged the gamut, sort of as I described, and ultimately that matrix with the check boxes began to rule out some, for instance, Forbes and Hennessy Field, and ultimately it also ruled out Savage. So the existing Coakley sort of rose to the top as far as the best fit for the project.
Yeah,
And Chin, as far as the how involved the MSBA gets in the kind of selection or ranking of the sites, they really rely on the professionals to give them the information, provide the information to them, all the criteria that we use to evaluate it. And rarely do we ever see that they have any countering opinions on a site that you select, because it's a very pragmatic approach to things. It's a very practical, fact-based approach to things. And it's important to keep in mind that this is really a partnership that you're entering into with the MSBA. It's not an adversarial relationship whatsoever. And their only concern is that you're doing a project that meets their guidelines, so they'll share in the cost of the project with the community, and that you're meeting their guidelines, and that it's a cost-effective solution that makes sense for your community. So they're really interested in getting a lot of detailed information, and they always evaluate it and offer questions if they have any concerns or if they need any additional clarification. So it's a very fluid process with a lot of back and forth between the design team, the OPM, and the MSBA.
I'll just add to that, the one major thing that they do look for is that the town currently owns and has clear title to the land. They want to make sure that as you progress forward, that it is a viable option as far as moving the project forward. So in this case, we've definitely cleared that hurdle.
okay. So the next question is, when will we know if it's 5th grade or 6th grade? So I take it that this is a question of when will the decision of the 5 to 8 versus 6 to 8 be made, timing wise? I could either take a crack at it, or if any of the school committee member would like to. Right now that the schedule is that we will be seeking for a decision sometime in the PSR phase, which will put the timing in sometime in June. Right now that the team is looking at into the developing the educational plan of both the 5 to 8 and 6 to 8 option. And then from there that they can evaluate and then present their finding to the school committee and as well as school building committee. I don't know if the school committee member would like to add anything to that.
Yeah, Chen, I could speak to it a little bit more. So the timeline that Justin took us through, right now we're really working on the ed plan, which we're going to hear more about. And at school committee meetings in February, the community will hear a lot more about the ed plan that will carry through both the 5 through 8 and the 6 through 8 options. But then really later on in the spring at school committee in April and primarily May, you will hear us discuss and debate the 5 through 8 or the 6 through 8 option. And as Chin said, we will have to determine the grade configuration by early June.
Okay. And the next question is what is the projected size in square footage of the new middle school? And I think that should be something that AI3 should answer.
Yeah, so the projected size is still being determined. As Teresa just mentioned, the design team is going through the educational planning process, which you'll hear more in the next portion of the presentation. But that really defines the specific spaces within the school. So as of right now, We're not 100% as far as honed in on size of the building, but that's what we're working on during this phase of the project. So at this point, it's unknown, but by the time we submit later on, it will be further defined.
So by March, we would know the fairly good idea of the size, right?
Yes, we'll know a fairly good idea. One thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned, we're carrying both the 5 through 8 and the 6 through 8 forward. So obviously that would have a size impact, but we should know rough sizes for both of those options at that time in March.
Okay, so the next question is, if MSBA only approves the code upgrades option, are we obligated to do that, or could we decide to fund a renovation or new construction on our own? Justin, would you like to answer that, or would you like me to answer that?
Either way. So the code repair option that the MSBA sort of has the design team and the project run through is to really establish what the baseline would be just to bring it up to code. It's not necessarily sort of a viable option to address any of the space deficiencies or the educational deficiencies. That's where the ad reno and the new construction really come into play. So ultimately, the option that is selected is it's selected by the town, the district. It's not necessarily selected by the MSBA. The MSBA has to back all of the research and the documents, but the ultimate decision, whether it be an ad reno or a new construction, is ultimately up to the district, to the owner, the town of Norwood.
Okay. The next question is from Kevin Donahue, and I'm going to ask Kevin to help us a little bit here, because the question may not be as clear, and I just want to make sure that we answer it correctly. So these schools you have noted are not at standard now, question mark, correct, question mark. Kevin, can you just type in again that are you referring to that the existing elementary schools or that we shown in the study? Okay, the answer is yes. So maybe Julie, you can answer in terms of the, I think this is referring to the sizes of classroom, et cetera, are less than the MSBA standard for the existing buildings.
Yeah, so we evaluated each building's program layout with the student population at that time. And I wouldn't say they aren't standard. They're operating as neighborhood schools. So they're generally a smaller population for a smaller building. But the schools that we did point out, the Willett, the Cleveland, those are showing that not only are they reduced size building wise, but they also are reduced space wise. So per MSBA guidelines, the entire building is too small and the individual spaces are too small. We didn't find that to be true for all 5. In some cases, the buildings overall were small, but the individual spaces complied with MSBA guidelines. And we can dive into the study more so that you can see how that works out, but ultimately the 2 or 3 elementary schools that we identified were sort of more in a problem state than the others.
Okay.
Yep. I'm sorry, Chin, just to add one thing to Julie. Everybody may not be aware that we did really look at the Willett after the long-term feasibility study came out. And in 2018, we did move the LMPA, the preschool, out of the Willett and into the Savage Center. So some of what this report from 2016 showed, we did reconcile at this time as best as we can. So we don't have all that overcrowding currently at the Willett.
And then I would also state that in terms of the classroom size, at the time when they were built, they were appropriate. So that should also be clarified. Okay, so the next item, next question, if a new building is to be constructed in place of the current Coakley Middle School, what happened to the students during the construction? and I think that this question is a little bit complicated to answer. Is that if it is necessary to construct a new building at the footprint of the existing building, then temporary space will be required, and then that will be part of the plan that the architects would have to come up with. But right now, we do not know what exactly is the option because the site is large enough that it's possible to look at building behind it. There are other options there. So this it's a little too early to address this issue at this time. At the later date, when we start to know where would be a good location, then we can start addressing this issue a little bit more in detail. The next, I'm answering the question in the sequence they come in, so so please be patient on that if I haven't gotten to your question. The next question is 528 can open room in the elementary schools. What would move that new grade formation? I am not sure if that if I just read the question, it says what would move that new grade formation take place or not. I am assuming this is as how would that decision be made? Teresa, would you like to answer that in terms of the whether the fifth grade moving to the middle school question?
I can start, and then I think I would like to ask Dr. Thompson to speak more
Okay.
as well. So this is, as we've already said, the very beginning of this process, and obviously we're looking for a lot of community feedback. And I know we're going to get into some slides on some visioning that we've already done to elicit staff feedback. So staff feedback, community feedback is going to be really important. But Dr. Thompson, if you could talk more about, the research and the educational aspects that we'll be evaluating.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure exactly what this question is asking. So I think it's asking what difference that's going to make at our elementary schools. So if the fifth grade moves out, many of you who've spent time in our elementary schools know that we have libraries and hallways. We have art rooms and storage spaces and custodial areas. We've refitted areas in our elementary schools and using them as instruction space. There are other spots where instead of having music in a room, we have it on the stage. So basically a lot of the adjustments we've made to make it work would go back to regular classrooms, and joint shared space would be joint shared space. For instance, a lot of our elementary schools, what we could have used for project space or gathering space in these large hallways is not being used that way. We have libraries, we have computer rooms set up in there. The other thing is programming and having special ed programming in and amongst their peers instead of into corners of rooms, which is really not what we're supposed to be doing. And then looking at the, if we want to read the question the other way, where, what are the advantages of a 5 through 8? Basically, we would have a majority, almost 2/3 of our students in a state-of-the-art learning environment. So that's number one. Number two, it gives the fifth grade a chance to, use a, smaller kind of team structure, maybe 2 teachers. We get more specialized teaching, more content put into there. The fifth graders would have more opportunities to engage with extracurricular activities, which doesn't always happen consistently at the elementary school level. And, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds are ready for a bigger challenge and to swim in a bigger pond. And it definitely gives them the opportunity to do that. Obviously, I tell people that where you have the grade is not as important as what you do with them where they are. So we would still run a fifth grade program, have it be developmentally appropriate. It would just be housed at the middle school, and there are advantages to that as far as being in a modern space, having opportunities to partake in extracurriculars and clubs and things along that line, and really kind of grow into active learning middle school students. As a former principal of a 5 through 8, I loved having the kids for 4 years. It really was a great opportunity to really see and foster some growth in those kids. So.
Dr. Thompson, there's a related question from a different that came in that is very relevant right now. It says, what would be the advantage of keeping the middle school at grades 6 through 8 instead of going to 5 through 8?
Well, you would have a smaller footprint at that site. I really can't think of more, either individually for fifth graders or more for our kids at our elementary schools. If we, the reality is, if we don't do a 5 through 8, and we have not, I need to give the committee time to do this, but the town would also need to accept that we would need to do more building and renovation at the elementary level, because those sizes and spaces are not adequate right now. So, some folks are hesitant about having younger kids with 8th graders. And again, it's how you set up the building, how you set up the programming, how you set up the transportation to do that. And I have done it in a 750 student school, 5 through 8. So going to 1,000 is not all that much more. I'm sure Dr. Fraser would agree with me on that part, but you have more. And I've also been a principal of a 6 through 8 school. So, oftentimes grade configurations is more about where the space is than it is about a definitive philosophy. But 5th grade needs to be 5th grade and treated like 5th grade. And 6th grade needs to be 6th grade. 7 and 8 is a little more alike. The kids are a little bit older, but middle schools are very developmental in how you design the programming and the structures and the facilities so that they can grow and mature.
Okay, so we're running slightly behind, and then we have 2 more questions, which I will get to in our next segment. I'll let AI3 continue the presentation, and then we'll get to answer these questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Jen. And I think a lot of the potential questions will be addressed during this sort of third section. The last portion will focus on the education planning aspect of the project. This includes the visioning, the ed plan, and the grade level configuration. The scope of work is occurring in parallel with the other items discussed in the previous section. The timeline and deadlines all remain the same. The slide illustrates the intermittent votes in March for the PDP submission. However, we will continue developing the ed plan and discussing the grade level configuration through the end of May and into early June, like we had just talked about. The May-June timeframe is when a vote is required to meet the established MSBA deadlines for the PSR submission. So just re-emphasizing, the decision for what grade level configuration the Copley project will be is not required until the end of May, early June. It hasn't been decided, as you can tell, and we're not deciding it tonight. So the project team will continue the process of collecting and evaluating the info to assist in the decision. The items noted on this slide are critical in supporting these decisions. Kelia is our educational planner and has joined us tonight to review these items. So at this time, I'll turn it over to her so she can talk about the visioning process and the educational plan.
Thanks, Justin. So as Justin just mentioned, I am the educational planner for this project. I've spent the past 12 years working with K-12 schools in New England and across the country to help them plan the future of their facilities. So we started our visioning process this past winter, and the purpose of educational visioning is really to bring key stakeholders together to establish ideas and concepts that will form the basis for the design of the new Copley Middle School. The process is a methodical one. We begin by outlining a foundation for the overall visioning process, and then we work with your stakeholders to understand how teaching and learning happen at Copley and understand which design concepts will really best support your school's pedagogy and curriculum. The information we gather at each session feeds directly into the documents that we're developing as part of the MSBA submission, including the ed program and the space summary, and as well as the discussion around whether or not this new school should be a 5 through 8 or 6 through 8. Now, visioning is not the only time that our team will be engaging your school staff to get feedback. We'll also be bringing them back in later on down the road when we start discussing programming for the future building. So our visioning process began on December 1st with our kickoff meeting. And the visioning kickoff is where we typically work with core leadership to get a sense from them what the needs, goals, and culture of the school and community are. We established the guiding principles for moving forward, discussed the critical issues that we need to be aware of, and identified the key stakeholders who are going to be engaged. After the kickoff, we did meet with the core leadership team again on December 15th. And this meeting, we reviewed and refined any last minute changes to the agenda for our first full visioning session, which was held on December 17th. It was at this first visioning session that we began to work with your stakeholders. Now, the stakeholders involved in this project represent a variety of perspectives. We worked with teachers, staff, principals, school committee members, and the building committee chair. And we laid out the visioning process for them and then reviewed a homework assignment that they had completed prior to the session. We asked them to share some images with us and tell us what they saw as the essence of Coakley Middle School, as well as what their hopes were for the future of the school. And these are just a sample of some of the images that they shared with us. Now, we also had a very dynamic conversation in that session where we explored the concepts that make up 21st century learning. And we learned about which of these concepts are already starting to be employed in the Norwood School District, and which of these concepts were goals for the future of Coakley. We coupled this discussion with an activity where we mapped out the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the Coakley Middle School community. We finished visioning session 1 with a quick discussion about 21st century design patterns, where we presented case studies that were examples of recent school construction projects and got feedback on which design patterns would be most important to see in the new Coakley Middle School. At the end of visioning session 1, we assigned 2 homework assignments to the participants. And the first was to provide comments on the case study images and get more detailed feedback on the design patterns presented. And then the second was to mock up an adjacency diagram showing their ideal layout for the new middle school. We met with core leadership again in the new year on January 6th to refine any last minute details needed prior to our January 7th visioning session. So visioning session 2, held on January 7th, began by focusing on obtaining more detailed feedback on the design patterns. Our team compiled the homework notes that the stakeholders had given us on the images that we provided. And then we reviewed those notes and went back to each set of images from the case studies to discuss them together as a group. So the design team answered the questions that the stakeholders had regarding how spaces were used. And then stakeholders provided the design team with additional insight as to which design patterns would best support the Coakley community. Now, the second half of visioning session 2 focused on 2 related topics. The first was understanding what the 5 through 8 middle school option would look like should you choose to go with that, and what important adjacencies would be in this new building. And now the topic regarding grade configuration of 5 through 8 through 6 through 8, as we've already discussed, is still a continuing one. So in this meeting, it wasn't our task to reach a decision on that point, but rather understand just how a 5 through 8 would function and how it would influence the layout of the building. We finished the session by splitting into 2 teams and developing diagrams illustrating our ideal layouts for the new school, which we reviewed as a group and then identified the best ideas and concepts from each one. Now, if anybody would like to review the visioning sessions or any of the information that came from those sessions, they will also be posted to the project website. With the second visioning session completed a week ago today, we're now starting to switch gears to focus on drafting the educational plan. Now, as was previously mentioned, this document is key to the MSBA submission as it lays out the educational need and the justification for the design of the proposed project. This document will outline the current conditions at Coakley, identifying what's working and what's problematic, as well as what will be needed to realize the full educational potential of the school. And we're working with several folks right now to compile this information and pull together a draft about 3 weeks from today. So now I'm going to hand things off to Kristen, who's going to be talking a little bit more about grade level configuration.
Thanks, Kalia. This roadmap shows the process we will take to the committee's selection of the final grade configuration. It starts at the macro level by studying grade configurations for all public schools in the state. From there, we narrow the scope to the existing conditions analysis. This includes the continued study of the elementary schools from where we left off at the feasibility study. the study of comparable case studies in middle schools for applicable components, and a deep understanding of all the advantages and concerns of a 5 through 8 and 6 through 8 program. Next, we layer in the community outreach using virtual open houses, community forums, and public project website and email account. The first community outreach forum is where we are today. These initial steps will inform the development of the 5 through 8 and 6 through 8 evaluations and options for the Coakley Middle School. As these options are developed, we will continue to layer in the community outreach with additional forums to come to a consensus at the end of May, early June, that will give the direction to the school committee to ultimately create the ideal grade configuration for the Coakley Middle School. An important factor when studying the grade configuration for the middle school is to understand why Norwood is considering the transition from a 6 to 8 to a 5 to 8 school and how it can benefit the town of Norwood. Adding 5th grade to the middle school will immediately provide overcrowding relief at all 5 of the elementary schools. It will create a single 5 through 8 school project that would have a positive impact across all grade levels, preschool through 8th grade, improving educational opportunities townwide. This will result in 2/3 of all Norwood public school students, those in grades 5 through 12, being in new facilities when you factor in that Norwood High School was opened less than 10 years ago. It would address all critical needs affecting function and education performance of the existing Coakley Middle School, identified in the 2017 Townwide Master Plan, as previously described by Julie. And it addresses the most deficient school building, the Coakley Middle School, immediately. Keeping all of that in mind, we take a step back and look at the public, non-charter schools in Massachusetts. We see that the 5 through 8 schools make up about 15% of all public middle schools, and 6 through 8 configurations make up about 21%. The rest are any number of other combinations that may or may not include 5th grade, but they don't necessarily align with the grade configuration options that are being studied by Norwood. As we narrow our focus back into Norwood, we first look at the current student capacity of the middle school and all 5 of the feeder elementary schools. When you look at each of the 5 elementary schools, using the current student enrollment, you can clearly see that they are undersized for their populations per MSBA standards. This results in all 5 buildings being overcrowded. By moving the 5th graders out of the elementary school into a new 5 through 8 school, you are alleviating some of the student capacity and overcrowding issues at the elementary schools. So what does a 5 through 8 school look like? There are a number of models that show how 5th grade can be introduced into the building. There is the 5th grade academy, which keeps 5th grade separate from the 6th through 8 to allow the 5th grade teams to function as physically and programmatically independent as they want from the 6th through 8 wing. There's a stacked 5th grade academy, which is similar to the previous option, but consolidates the learning core and introduces more opportunity for shared academic spaces. The horizontal connections option creates opportunities for 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 connections on the same floor or stacked with a communicating stair. The option using vertical connections and separations use stacked floor plates to create connections to grades vertically and can use shared programs such as dining to define an upper and a lower school. There are advantages to keeping the 5th grade program at the neighborhood elementary schools, as well as moving the program to the new middle school. Should 5th grade remain at the elementary, the students get 1 more year at their neighborhood school. They maintain the program of the 5th grade mentors to the 1st graders. Busing and drop-off pickup remain the same, and shared programs remain the same. Now, if the 5th graders move to the middle school, 4th graders get to join the mentor program a year earlier and mentor the 1st graders. 5th graders get the use of dedicated STEAM-specific rooms a year early. Students get to spend 4 consecutive years at the same school prior to transitioning to high school. 5th grade teachers would be in 1 school for additional collaboration and teaming. It addresses the overcrowding issues at all the elementary schools. Provides the same transition time at middle school, 4 years, and at high school, also 4 years. It allows middle school students more time to develop identity, build relationships with faculty, guidance, and staff. 8th graders now get to mentor the 5th graders. Finally, when you look beyond the fifth grade program and at the fifth grade students themselves, you get a better idea of the social and emotional concerns and advantages of moving the fifth grader into the middle school environment. Some concerns you may have are the physical size difference between a fifth grader and an eighth grader, the younger students being exposed to mature conversations too early, the inherent close proximity of different age groups on the bus, and some younger students may be more vulnerable in a middle school environment. Conversely, the advantages and ways to address the previously mentioned concerns are the previously mentioned mentorship program, which increases the leadership opportunities for the eighth graders. This also gives the fifth graders upperclassmen role models. Separated gathering spaces allow for controlled interactions and division of social conversations. Busing schedules and seat arrangements are developed to allow closer age groups to be grouped together and separated from the older students. Students get the chance to be inspired by upperclassmen work on display within the school. Pupils are grouped together that are more alike than either elementary or secondary pupils. And a larger variety of students are within the school and available for after-school activities, clubs, sports, performing arts, music, etc. That being said, Justin will now walk us through some of the live polling so we can get your feedback.
Yeah, so what we would like to do now, as Kristen just mentioned, is have a live polling session with our audience. The project team has generated 5 questions related to grade level configuration. The first question being if you have a preference, 5 through 8 or 6 through 8. The second and third relate to advantages and concerns of the 5th grade being included in the Coakley project in terms of the physical environment. Questions 4 and 5 again ask for advantages and concerns, but this time in terms of the social and emotional aspects. So these are the 5 questions that we're asking for input on. To complete this poll, you guys can go to the website, www.menti.com. It's MENTI.com. And when you go to that website, you'll see a search bar at the top, similar like a Google search bar, and it will ask for a code. You can enter the code on the screen, 7619717. Spaces aren't required. And this should bring up the very first question. Once you answer that question, it will kick you to the next question and all the way through the 5 questions. The poll will be open. We'll leave it open for the next half an hour or so, up until about 8:30 when this meeting was scheduled till, and we'll see what the results are. So with that, we're going to end the presentation tonight on this slide. Again, the menti.com, the polling website is right there in the center of the slide, and the code directly beneath it, 7619717. Also, the next 2 community forums that we had mentioned will be in mid-March and mid-May. And finally, the project website is newcmsproject.org. So that should be live right now, and you can always log on to that and get any updated documents or submit any questions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chin to open up the final questions and answers portion for tonight.
Okay, we have a few questions from the previous section that we need to answer first. The first one is, what impact to the building design, if any, does the current pandemic have on the building, the design plan? And there are additional questions. Do architects need to think of different building systems now to more effectively cope with the public health conditions brought forward by the pandemic? Justin, I think you will be the right person for that.
Yep. Yeah. So the pandemic definitely adds a new level of complexity to a lot of our projects. When it first came out, we weren't exactly sure the scope and the nature. But what actually ended up coming out of this, and actually Harvard, I believe the School of Health, but I could be wrong, submitted a document as far as a school reopening policy. And we sent that to our engineers for our projects in current construction and said, what do you think of this? What is the sort of the ramifications in school construction? And the interesting thing enough was that after they had reviewed it, all of the recommendations are already included into any current design as far as mechanical systems, ventilation, sort of air changes per hour. So that aspect of it is already being accounted for. So essentially, that doesn't really change on our end. As far as any of the other aspects, they're a little bit unknown. The best that we can do at this point is design flexible spaces. As restrictions change, it will allow the district to sort of address any concerns or update based on new requirements. But at this point, we don't really see a major change in what we've already been doing, because what we've been doing sort of already complies to all of the recommendations. So I don't know if that fully answers it or not, or if anyone else wants to.
If it is not, that was a question from Robert Donnelly that please type in if we miss anything. The next question is if new construction, would the existing Coakley Middle School be used during construction similar to the high school project?
That is still to be determined, sort of as referenced in the last question and answer session. Now that we have the preferred site, we're going to fully evaluate the site and look at all the options, whether it's going to be sort of a phased construction like the high school was, or whether it's going to be some hybrid or some other form. So that is still to be determined at this point. Okay.
The next question is, so just to clarify, if the new building is 5 through 8, the idea is that grade 5 will be departmentalized as well? Departmentalized.
Yeah. Can I jump on that, Chen?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So for middle schools run as teams, not departments. You know, you have teachers who teach different subjects, but they work as teams. A 5th grade team would be smaller, in my opinion, although we are still visioning. So it might be a 2-person team, 2 teachers teaching together, which is exactly what some of our 5th grades in some of our schools are doing right now. It might, depending on the numbers, be a 3-person team, but it would not be a 4/5-person team like you would see in grade 7 and 8. So hopefully that answers that. So you would have a team of teachers. They come together and they plan together. They work together. They meet student needs together. It's a very developmental approach for middle school, and they would be part of that structure. But it's not like you have the science in one wing. It's a team together when you design a middle school.
Okay. The next question is about is for the architect. Anticipating a beautiful new building, would you please describe your experience with and anticipate a project-specific application of low toxicity building material and FF&E furniture and equipment to encourage high-quality indoor air quality to support healthy brain and body development? I'm going to let Justin take that question.
Yep. Yeah. So that is a really big priority here in this office: sustainability and the environmental aspect, not only to the actual environment, but also the people who are within the building. All of our projects are either LEED or CHIP certified at minimum. Most are silver and gold. So that sort of starts to address it. We do select materials that are specific for good indoor air environmental quality, low VOCs, low off-gassing, and we do the same through the FF&E process. So it's definitely a high priority. And the way we develop our documents and our buildings, they reflect that too. So,
thank you. Justin, the next question is either you or me, and then I'm going to let me read the question and then we can discuss that. What is the earliest date that the new building could be open? And this is a tough one because we don't even know what option and what kind of scenario is yet.
Right. I believe so. If we stay on schedule now, the track is to start construction the spring of 2023. So from then it could be anything beyond. It could be a year and a half, could be 2 years. Like Chin just referenced, it all depends on whether it's an ad reno, whether it's sort of a multi-phased project, or whether it's a new construction project. So for instance, if it was new construction, starting in 2023, typically we see roughly about 2 years. So without knowing any more information or sort of anything being a little bit more concrete, that's sort of the best guess at this point.
For the time being, say 2025 fall is the earliest possible for the time, from what we know as of now.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me a second, and I have to jump onto this is a different another question here. Like, is any of the administrative spaces need currently in the Savage Center being considered or allowed to be in the project? Our answer in terms of the allowed, yes, it can be considered to the project, but the MSBA will most likely consider those are ineligible spaces, and then so the town will be basically the town will have to pay for the cost of those spaces in this particular case. And I think Justin, has there any discussion on that yet?
No, not yet. We are analyzing the existing spaces, the admin spaces in Savage to get a rough area. And we're going to see how that can sort of fit within the overall project. And as Chin just mentioned, sort of flagging it as a potential ineligible cost from the MSBA.
Okay. And oh, that question was, it showed up both in the chat and the Q&A. That's all right. Is a 5-2A model, if a 5-through-8 model is chosen, who decides the layout of the building? Whether grade 5 will be completely separate, or it will be lower school and upper school scenario?
Yeah, so I can take that one, Shin.
Okay.
The visioning sessions that had just wrapped up that Keelia talked about, that really allowed the design team and the OPM and everybody involved actually to sort of bounce ideas off of each other and to sort of determine or start to determine how the conversation as far as what would be the most beneficial layout and configuration and inclusion for the project. So that conversation has started and we got a lot of really good information from it. We'll obviously continue to develop it. And as Keelia mentioned at that meeting, or at that meetings plural, there was multiple versions or multiple meetings. It was multiple stakeholders. So it wasn't just district administration. It wasn't just teachers. It was also principals. It was also school committee members. The building committee chair was on it. So there were a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of good conversations that came from that. So that will help drive the discussion and the decision moving forward. So if anyone else wants to jump in too, feel free.
No, I think that summarized our process. I think there's a lot of strong feelings about what the 5th grade will look like. But as we move through this iterative process, we hope to get closer to consensus between the two. And
just to add to that, that the design team, AI3 team has taken the school, the project team, some of the project team member to tour a 5-through-8 school in Natick. And that was a very, very beneficial way to understand how they organize and then what are the pluses and minuses from that particular project. I am going to skip this one, but Mr. McFarland, you have typed in a statement, not a question. So unless that there is a question related that's buried in there, if you don't mind re-entering that, I would appreciate it, because if it is a statement that that there's not a benefit that there's nothing we can answer there. And the next question, are there other potential ineligible costs being considered? Alan, would you like to take this up, or?
I can certainly try, Chin.
Okay.
I mean, at this point, we really don't know, what will be eligible and what will not be eligible. I mean, the information we've gotten from the MSBA to date says that they will pay for approximately 50% of the eligible cost. What in the end that means, is really to be determined. I mean, usually will be ineligible things in any building. It's just the way, the MSBA system or process goes. MSBA also put some limitations on the size of certain structures. A gym is an example. A middle school will only be allowed a gym of a certain size. If you want a bigger gym, you can certainly do that, but MSBA would not include the cost of that additional square footage in as an eligible cost. So I guess that's to be determined. We should have a reasonable handle, I would think, when the preliminary schematic report is done in July. But right now, it's difficult to say exactly, what the total amount of ineligible costs would be.
Yeah, the only, Alan, if I may add to this, this is Tim Bonfatti, just the only, the program is different than what the high school went through 10 years ago. It has evolved and there are more ineligible costs. I will be clear about that. The only one that's sort of being considered and no decisions have been made, because obviously this is all part of what gets put in front of the building committee over the next couple of months, is the possibility of including an auditorium that is ineligible for a middle school in the MSBA program. That's the only one that we've sort of been openly discussing, but there are other ineligible costs, which we intend to have a presentation at an upcoming building committee meeting to go through that whole it's much more complex than time allows here, but we'll be doing that at a building committee meeting in the next, probably within the next month or two.
And there's a follow-up question to also from Sarah Quinn. Alan, can we finally get a pool? That was the question.
Very long and complicated story, so I won't bore you. I would love to have one. However, requesting a pool would be a DOA with the MSBA, if I use all my acronyms.
It will definitely be in the ineligible category.
Oh, absolutely.
And here's another question. Is there another school completed project, i.e. building that is middle school that's completed site to look at besides the Natick location? And the simple answer is yes. And then I think that in terms of other example that we just have to come up with a criteria in terms of what are the things that we would want to see, and we can definitely find other recent public school that has been completed for the committee to visit. That answer is relatively simple.
Yeah, I will say, Chin, that in addition to Natick, earlier in the year before COVID hit, we did visit several other schools. One was another one of the middle schools in Natick. We also visited the regional system in Bridgewater Raynham. Both were very nice schools, and NCM was there to film all of those facilities. So eventually all of those will be up and running, and you'll be able to see what those schools do, what those schools have. And in addition, we also did a tour of the existing Coakley. So I think you'll be able to see what we have versus what the rest of the world has. And it's going to be striking.
as far as I can tell, that is all the questions that has been submitted so far.
Great.
Justin, are we ready to pull up the result of the poll?
We're going to leave it open for a little bit longer.
Okay.
And we wanted to review it before showing it just to make sure that it was accurate and there weren't any glitches and hiccups. So we aren't going to be showing it tonight, but we can definitely post the results on the website, and we can definitely show them at the next community forum as well. So they will become part of the documents.
There are additional comments such as just simply thank you and the very informative and no more questions.
Alan, can I ask a question? Tom Maloney here. Chin, maybe you can answer this,
Yeah.
or Tim.
Sure.
We're talking about the grade configuration question. In the last 10 or 15 years, among those school systems that have faced the same choice, 5 through 8 versus 6 through 8, how many of them, in your knowledge, have chosen 6 through 8 as opposed to 5 through 8?
So we did. What I have done was that I went into the MSBA record and tried to decipher out of the 20 MSBA middle school projects in their classification. There are only about 30% of them are 5 through 8. What was more interesting was that there is a trend for building larger schools, and almost all of the majority of the time when community were given the option for 2 different enrollment options, majority of the time they picked the larger one. And my guess is that that's because that means the MSBA participate in your larger school, therefore more of your students' needs are being taken care of, and so the town's share for those students would be less, supposed to. So in Norwood's case would be the scenario would be that if you pick the 6 to 8, that the 5th grade need would be still at the town's level, and the town would have to figure out a solution for that. And so that is the trend that you can actually, that's definitely the case. But they're not always the choice between 5-8 and 6-8, because there are many other cases where it is a 7-8 that gone to 6 through 8, or 5-7 and then 5 to 7, 5 to 8. So there are other scenarios that has been that are in the 20 middle schools that MSBA has completed.
And
I don't know.
Tom, just to add to what Chin said, for us personally, the last 5 new middle schools that we've designed, 2 of them were 6 through 8, and the other 3 were 5 through 8. One of the 6 through 8s wanted to be a 5 through 8, but the MSBA, they didn't meet the criteria for proving that their elementary schools would not be underutilized. So they had to go back to a 6 through 8, even though they wanted to be a 5 through 8. So it's been tilted in our experience a little bit more towards 5 through 8 out of the last 5 recent projects we've done.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
And I think, and one other piece of information that's kind of fascinating to me, 13 out of the 20 are 800 and higher in terms of the population. So the majority of the MSBA middle school project are large middle school, 800 students and up. It's just an observation. That's just simply the numbers.
But it's fair to say, though, from for your answer, Jim, and your answers, Jim, that the trend seems to be where allowable to go 5 through 8, especially if you have MSBA participation.
It's probably larger population is usually the choice.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else?
If I
We
could
don't
just,
have any more questions.
if I could just, if no more questions, Shin, if I can just wrap up quickly, really want to thank everyone for being here today. Some great questions, great feedback. We thank you all. I just want to remind people about the website. It's still a work in progress, but we're getting there, and please look at that, as well as there's also the email site to ask us questions. We'll certainly be willing to answer questions from anyone, provide the best information we can so people can make an informed decision. So with that, if there's anything else, I guess we're done. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody very much, and look forward to the next session in March. So with that, thank you very much.